Hi guys, it's Joey. Makeupless Joey today, so sorry for that folks, but never mind. Still a little bit under the weather, so I might be sipping water throughout, so apologies for that. Today's video is going to be on the subject of the Morrigan and specifically her tie as a goddess of the witches, a goddess of magic, and that aspect of her alone. I will possibly make a few of these videos addressing the different aspects of the Morrigan in my personal experience with reference to myths and possibly books. My brain is determined not to work today. It's how you have to take it slowly. So, as I already addressed in the More About the Morrigan video, there are some common misconceptions about the goddess Morrigan only having like a very limited role as a death goddess, as a warrior goddess. And whilst she has the death aspect and she has the warrior aspect, this tends to be where people focus on and don't bother to learn any more. And people who have interacted with Morrigan, people who she has called to her path, because that's the way it works with her, not the other way around, start to realise quite quickly that it is so much more than that. In Tales of Myths, often her victories in battle are directly tied into her magical workings. She creates storms, she creates a situation using magic, she shapeshifts into her various forms, be they animal or be they stages of her godhead. So at one point she might be a beautiful maiden, and at one point she might be a wizened old crone, and it's often to test heroes. So the shape-shifting is really important symbology within the myths, and then there's this aspect of her utilising magic as well. The myths, if you are interested in the Morrigan, are something you should really go and read and interpret and think about yourself. I am loath to, and I will do my best not to, go over the myths in any detail, because the interpreting of the myths, the reading about them, the keying in on the symbology behind things is a very personal experience. And if you have interest in the Morrigan, which I would assume so, given the video's subject, then that needs to be something you pursue yourself out of respect for the goddess, if nothing else. But in those myths, the shapeshifter aspect, the magical workings aspect, shows that she is indeed tied into the realm of magic. She's often tied into the realm of the Fae, and she has a very powerful sorceress aspect in Morgan Le Fay. Now, Morgan Le Fay is a difficult character, and I had real problems because I felt very drawn to Morgan Le Fay, but then the mythology that I knew, and she would just deep, dark, crazy person, slept with her brother, was pretty scheming and angry all the time, and all the rest of it. There are actually two myths with Morgan Le Fay, and in one is that version of events, interpretation of these myths, I think it is, and then in another one she's a healing lady of Avalon, and she's directly tied into Avalon, which is to do with the afterlife, and she was one of 9 ladies of Avalon, and it's I think Stephanie Woodfield said it's her interpretation that it might have been that was originally sort of like 9 facets of the goddess Morrigan. But that's open to interpretation, which is interesting, and it's fairly I mean, the problem with history and myths and stuff is it's all very difficult to pin down because a lot of the Celtic tradition was oral, as I've mentioned before. That these Morrigan myths were diluted into the Morgan Le Fay myths and incorporated into the Christian mythos. And because Morrigan as an entity goes against what a ideal Christian woman was to the people at the time, they sort of demonized her, made her into a negative character, made her into a villain, made her into someone who would sleep with her own brother and was power crazy. But all the way through my childhood, I was very drawn to images of Morgan Le Fay. Paintings that sort of seemed to capture something more of her than this basic story was. And in some of, even in the TV adaptations and movies, sometimes her character just seems so amazing. And the most recent one was the BBC Merlin, and I loved BBC Merlin. It was fun. Some people didn't like it because it strayed, and it was a modern interpretation maybe, and there was stupid elements. It was like very comic in some. It was family friendly basically, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic, and Arthur was yummy. Just saying. Some of the other guys are pretty yummy as well, but Arthur was amazing. I could go on and rant about that TV series and tell you what I thought was great and what I thought needed more work. And one of the things I thought was really odd was their Morgana story. It seemed to be that she just went off the deep end very, very quickly, and there should have been more of an explanation about certain bits and pieces. Their backstory and why she did it was interesting and good. Like, Uther was really anti-magic, like really anti-magic people, and she had gifts and she couldn't help it, and she saw him persecuting magic users, and that slowly started her down that road, and she started pitying those he was picking on. But it went very quickly from pitying them to her being full on crazy, which was a shame. I think if they'd have drawn back from crazy a little bit and just gone, like, shown her reasoning out her behaviours a bit more, that would have been even more powerful for that version of the story, which obviously is a good story. The image of Morgan Le Fay as obviously as making a strong female figure into a negative one is nothing new. And it explained to me once I came across Stephanie Woodfield's book, I was like, this is why I've been attracted to the myths, and why I've been interested and intrigued in Morgan Le Fay, because it's very likely to be the Morrigan myths filtered down by monks into something less than what she was, to try and spread Christianity at the time. And that finally makes sense. Even in the bad version of the myth, she takes Arthur to Avalon, which is the land of the. It's to do with the land of the dead. It's to do with the land of the Fae. It's like the afterlife, which is one of the main points that people put across, that it could well have been about Morrigan, because it ties into her as being Fae and ties into the afterlife, re-death and rebirth aspect. Why else would she take Arthur to the fallen king? There are a lot of Morrigan myths as well where she judges the worth of a king, and if she judges him to be failing in his rule, she will bring forth a younger, more vigorous successor that she then usually sleeps with in the stories. And it's this myth behind that is that she is to do with sovereignty. She is the direct tie between sovereignty and land, and it's to do with connecting the young king to the land, and the old king who is failing would mean the land would fail as well. And that's a Celtic belief thing, that the ping is the land. directly tied in. So if he was failing as a king and getting old and failing, then they believe that land and crops and all that sort of thing would fail. And then we can see that mythos within the Arthurian legend with her trying to replace Arthur. So it's interesting. And obviously Morgan Le Fay is a sorceress. And it's interesting how Merlin is a sorcerer and he is positive, like the male sorcery magic user is fine, and then the female main magic user is negative. There are all sorts of different interpretations of even of the Christian version of those myths. So it's fascinating. Fascinating. I mean, I'm not going to go into all of that because I could probably go on for quite a long time about the Morgan Le Fay mythos alone. But the point worth gleaning off the top, possibly, is that Morgan Le Fay, therefore, as a facet of the Morrigan, therefore directly ties into her being a magic user, and to do with being a goddess of the witches and of spell work and of things like this. As well as tying her into all of the elements. There's a lot of elemental symbology within the Morgan Le Fay myths to do with the water and like Avalon especially, and that was all to do with healing magic. In the other version, whose name completely flips my head right now, I should have written it down, she's just a healer. Her main use of magic is to heal, and that tying into the just taking my necklace out, sorry, to give myself something to play with. That to do with the Avalon and the water myth, and then the tying into Morrigan, it makes more sense that way. So that's a little bit about mythology to do with Morgan Le Fay and the Morrigan as being one. The easiest way I think I can describe my relationship with the Morrigan as a queen of witches is because how do I phrase this? It's to do with self-empowerment. Morrigan, as a goddess, admires the strength in women, and not every witch has the strength she is looking for, and it's her direct connection to an understanding of the elements, an understanding of knowledge, and an appreciation of her as a goddess, recognizing your own self-power, but not in such a way that you manipulate or misuse it. That is something that I think she calls on particularly. It would make sense in a lot of ways because witches go looking for different interpretations of deity. They put modern usage to ancient gods and perspectives. It's a different way of understanding deity that connects us with the beliefs of our ancestors, but takes away some of the ancient superstition and puts into it our modern experience and knowledge. Not every, for example, not every pagan who worships, say, the Greek mythology is going to keep in line with Greek beliefs or Greek lifestyle. Not every follower of the Morrigan is going to live with the Celtic lifestyle, because a war just isn't the same as it was. It's not something that every single person is going to be involved in anymore. What she does look at is the trials of life, of self wars. You know, we are collectively followers of the Morrigan, are warriors in our own sense. We have followed the path of a warrior in some sense. We have fought battles. We have stuck up for our beliefs. We have tried to protect those whom we love in some way. There is often everyone I know who has dealings with the Morrigan has had trials and tribulations, and not stupid little stuff like life changing, gut wrenching, difficult life circumstances, which they've fought and come out on top. And that also applies to a lot of witches I know. Like, a lot of witches have found this path because they've been through difficult times and the old stuff didn't help them, and they went in search of something different. And magic is the metaphysical meeting the mundane in a process of change. And I think that embodies who the Morrigan is in a lot of ways. She is the goddess of the old. She is the goddess of the new, who comes to us in our time of trial and tribulation and strengthens us. And as we undergo that process of change and we grow, she takes pride in her little witchies that do that. Now, the other major way in which I mentioned is her shape-shifter aspect. When I first got a vision of the Morrigan, she came to me as I thought, a man. It was a male voice. And I that this is a test in that for me. And there was further testing. And there is something incredibly magical about the Morrigan. And I cannot separate my path as a witch from my spirituality, and never should I, and never should anyone else, if you ask me, unless you are connecting with those energies, with divinity, with higher understanding, higher learning, higher purpose. It's kind of like, why would you not be a witch without that guidance? It doesn't make sense to me. It's not to say that it's everybody, anyone out there who's taken that the wrong way. It's not that I'm saying anybody else is wrong. That is my personal interpretation of how a witch should be. Very connected with divinity. I think it can often be very detrimental to any god to associate them with only one thing, like I said before. Like, I think you could possibly, in this phraseology, apply it to every single god and goddess. Like, of course they're going to be a god and goddess of the witches, because that's who is celebrating them. That is who's connecting to those energies. It's all coming from the same place, all these energies. It's just a different interpretation of way of looking at things. And as I've said earlier, the Morrigan performs acts of magic herself. It's not a goddess who is far removed from acts of magic. You can see acts of the magical in all myths about all gods and goddesses. Goddesses appearing could be considered magical, and transforming things into things and themselves into things is all part of every god and goddess mythos. There is magic within all, but specifically the Morrigan casts spells, and in her guise of Morgan Le Fay, that's all to do with witchcraft and spellcrafting, and it be healing, aiding those she loves in battle, and those sorts of shape-shifting, appearing as a crow, and showing her godhood through the shape-shifting ability. And as I have said, I have experienced that firsthand. And I often think of spell crafting and works of magic and meditation as being another way in which to connect with deity. And this may come from, or it may be another reason why the Morrigan picked me, because of the way I view spell work. Every time I think, personally, my belief, that every time you are spellcrafting, you are keying in to petitioning the universe, petitioning your goddess, requesting aid, seeking to connect yourself with the divine energies to bring about change, to push forth energy. You push, they pull, and without their acceptance of what you're doing, nothing is going to take place. And this is why when people say, you know, there is no well, some people say there is no threefold law, or there is no repercussion of negative petitioning of the universe. I would disagree. I would say if you're going to push something and it occurs, like the universe or the spirit or deity allows it to happen, they may well be testing and judging you. And I think that at some point they are going to allow it to come back. If they allow that to pass, that's perhaps them teaching you a lesson somewhere down the line, like keeping everything in balance. I do not believe we are the be-all and end-all and can assert our magical will over somebody without them allowing it to pass. And they could be allowing it to pass for all sorts of reasons. I mean, as witches, gods quite often test us. Like, you have to know how to defend yourself. You have to know how to protect yourself. You have to understand this type of magic. And there are all sorts of people who misuse energy in different ways, and a lot of them may not tie in directly with God and Goddess. They may not be guided. There are people out there, for example, who are energy vampires and suck on the energy of other people and never knowing what they're doing. Is that something that they could be punished for when they don't know they're doing it? It's an interesting question that probably only deity would be able to give you a satisfactory answer, because human opinion is human opinion. So I think you can tie Magick into all deity, but the Morrigan especially. I think she has a real magical aspect. Whenever I sort of visualize her, unless I'm working with one specific aspect, Anu, Macha, or Bave, Maiden, Mother, Crone, quite often she's fluid. And I said this in my I made a video earlier, and I can't upload it yet because Gnome isn't home, of updating how my altar is. That when I look at her, it's like looking into a huge crystal, and you see glints of light, and they shift with the light. But that's how I imagine, how I see the Morrigan. I'm getting glints of the whole, but I could never hope to see the whole, so it's constantly shifting. It's like smoke. It's like fluid. And she has that mystical, magical way of shifting her shape, of being a shapeshifter, of changing her image, changing her visage, changing who she looks like, and different ways of interacting with her. And it's infinite, basically, and it can be very mind-boggling to me to even start to try and comprehend that. And that's why we do simplify it down into Maiden, Mother, Crone. So I think I've covered everything that I really needed to. The way that Magick is a connection to divinity in itself. Witches are obviously celebrating older gods and older interpretations of deity with modern spin. She performs magic in the myths, and we've discussed the myths of her directly, and then the Morgan Le Fay myths. For anybody interested in that aspect, I find it hugely fascinating to go reading about the Morgan Le Fay stuff. It's just fascinating. I think it is. And magic obviously is another way we can give back, you know, give back to our goddess, give things in offering, like when we're burning a candle for them or when we're burning incense. It's a form of magic. And I have found that it's a good way to thank the Morrigan, especially in her role as a goddess of witches, as a goddess of magic. Like, I quite often burn candles for it, and it's a kind of magic that ties in with me and ties in with her. So I think I will leave it there at 25 odd minutes, because I think I covered the basics there. I'm sure I've got a feeling I might have missed a key point that I meant to mention, and my head's like this. So no, I think that will do. So I hope that was informational, informative. My brain is completely gone. Please don't let that be the picture. I feel bad isn't enough as it is with no makeup on. So I'm going to probably do a few more of these. I want to cover the Maiden Mother Crone aspects as well as some of the broader perspectives. But as a lady, as a goddess, as a sorceress of magic, the Morrigan definitely ties into all of those, the symbolism, the actualism, all of that. She is definitely a goddess of magic. So that's it for this video. Many blessings.